Richard Osmer, and I just forgot Katie Douglas. I was going to say Katie Olson, but that's wrong.
Hi, I'm Rick Osmer. I teach at Princeton Theological Seminary. This is Katie Douglas.
I'm Katie Douglas. I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher through Princeton Theological Seminary, but I live in Seattle.
Yeah, opposite ends of the United States, but we're co-directors of a study of confirmation that's taking place in 5 different denominations. One of them is yours, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. Another is the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and last but not least, my own denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA. And we're all about what you're about here in this conference, Rethinking Confirmation. We're doing a national study because we felt it was really timely to take a look again at what's going on in churches in terms of confirmation, and to try to see if we could figure out the validity of some of the things that we were hearing from pastors. We're all pastors ourselves, and in fact, the rest of the research team has been here for the past day and a half, and if you guys would stand up, just let you know who they are.
And I've got a slide with their pictures also.
Yep. And Kate, stand up. We've talked the moderators into letting us have Q&A at the end today. And we've got a few ground rules for that. Nobody gets on their soapbox. You can only have 2 sentences when you ask a question. And I feel really comfortable doing that because I know Rolf Jacobson very well, and he's sort of part stand-up comedian, part MC, but he's also a satirist in a lot of ways, and if you get out of line, he's going to haul you back into line. But we're looking forward to having questions and answers, but you got to do that in a disciplined way for it to work well, so don't get on your soapbox. Let me tell you a little bit about the Confirmation Project and where it came from and why we need it. We're about halfway through the project right now, so some of the things that we're going to be sharing with you are just emergent findings and reflections that have begun to take place over the past 24 hours. We've got 2 parts to the project. One is a national survey, and my guess is that some of you may have participated in that. And the other is a form of qualitative research using the methodology of portraiture. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. We're looking at some congregations in depth, and we're doing a national survey to try to get some of the big trends. We really need this study. Why do we need this study? Well, we need this study because people like you guys are telling us that we need to rethink confirmation. I can't tell you how many pastors have called me up over the years and said, I'm really having trouble finding a good curriculum. Can you recommend a curriculum for me? The curriculum that I'm using seems to be out of date, and I'm hearing that more and more. And others are saying, well, what about this whole mentoring thing that people are doing in confirmation? How long do you think confirmation should be? What age should we start it? So we're getting questions and questions and questions, and I think if we stop and think about it at all, we realize that our context has just changed so much. And in so many different ways that it's time to take another look at what is actually going on in confirmation. Just think about some of the changes that have taken place over the last 20 years. A person like myself didn't grow up using a cell phone or the digital media, but now my grandchild already can pick up a cell phone, and she's 2, and she can scroll her way through it. I mean, she can get Rafi's picture on the cell phone at age 2, and the digital divide is great. We've seen tremendous changes in family structure over the last 20 to 25 years. And I so appreciate what the bishop had to say about the importance of the family, but I think we all know what a challenge that is today, where we have single parent families and dual career families, and we have gay and lesbian families, we have single parent families, we are having an increase in out of wedlock births. Changes in family structure are great. And they really represent a challenge that we're going to face up to. We've seen the rise of religious diversity in our country. We've seen the growth of the so-called nuns, not affiliated with any congregation. A lot of the nuns are people who've come out of mainline congregations and denominations like ours, and then during young adulthood or emerging adulthood, they've moved into the unaffiliated sector with the population. You could add other things to what I'm saying, right? You know what I'm saying. The context has changed pretty greatly. So it's time to take another look at what we're doing in confirmation and to see if the way we've done it in the past is working or if we need to rethink it and retool it in certain kinds of ways. So let's move in a little bit to our research. Katie's going to talk to you about the survey research, and then I'll tell you about the portraiture.
Great, thanks.
Dr. Douglas.
All right, let me tell you a little bit about our surveys and the questionnaire. So we wanted to make sure our questionnaire and our survey was actually surveying things that were questions arising from ministry leaders like yourself. So early on, we gathered a group of researchers, even before this group of researchers, who called pastors and asked the question, what are your questions about confirmation? What are you doing? What are the big challenges that you're facing or your big questions? The first question we asked was usually followed by this question: what's everybody else doing? Everybody wanted to know, well, what's everybody else doing? So one of the goals of this survey is to just create a map to let some people know what other people are doing, so you can compare your ministry with kind of what's going on in on the national scale. Our research has been done in a way that we'll be able to show you trends today that are across denominations, but eventually we'll be able to slice them according to denomination. So you'll be able to look at your church by, just reflecting on it, then look at your denomination and their practices, but then also compare that to the national trends. So we created a questionnaire that was distributed last fall. It was a bit like launching a rocket. We had a few false starts, and there was much anticipation. Eventually, we got it off the ground in October, and it was open through March. And then a second wave of questionnaires was distributed in the spring, and that happened just before Easter, and it's actually still open through August 10th. And the hope there in having two waves, this is called a longitudinal study, so we want to look at change over time. In the first wave of the study, we asked ministry leaders, parents, and youth to take the survey. In the second wave, we only asked youth to take the survey. We wanted to know what difference it made to participate in confirmation. Did this have an effect on their beliefs? Did this have an effect on the amount that they volunteer? Did this have an effect on their participation in congregational life, in Sunday school, or in church attendance? So these are the types of things that we were looking for. So we went into the first wave happened and was going along steadily, and our numbers were slowly increasing. And then we began our second wave of the study, and 2 days in, we're working with a research company called Walker Research, and they said, Katie, could you give us a call? And I said, well, sure. And they said, it needs to be as immediate as possible. And I thought, okay, what's happening? And they had a very unfortunate message for us. Our survey was hacked. We are part of the news, people. Our little study, we are not in the news actually, but not yet, not until we revolutionize confirmation and we make the news. So what happened, and we have an amazing team. We're also working with a company called the Smart Church Project, and they are running our web design and all of our web stuff. And through their kind of digging and looking at Walker Research, we were able to identify that one of the links that was distributed to youth was used 1,200 times to take the survey fraudulently and collect $5 gift cards to Amazon, which amounts to about $6,000, which is quite unfortunate. Initially our reaction was like, what? Some kid in rural Ohio just cashed in $6,000 of Amazon gift cards? This is really unfortunate. And how are we going to break the news to some youth minister that some kid stole $6,000? Well, Michael Gowecki and Brian Miller are amazing. We're calling them the digital missioners. Are amazing web guys. Looked at IP addresses, and they said, these are actually from all over the world. There were about 120 from China, and some in Russia, some in Brazil. So these are clearly not the group we're wanting to survey, right? And then they were able to narrow it down to 10 computers in a college town in China. So this is really unfortunate. And there's a couple of losses and things that had to happen because of it. One was we had to file something with the federal government, a formal complaint, and that's been filed. There was this financial loss, and that is just something the project has to absorb. It's just an unfortunate loss. But then there's also a loss to the research. So initially we thought we had about 2,000 youth respondents, which was a really good number to report on. But losing 1,200 youth responses takes the number down to 700 youth responses. So basically the rollout of the research, what we were really excited to share were some of the youth responses. And that is not going to be what I'm sharing today. In fact, I won't even be able to share that with you until next summer, once we've collected some more data from youth. So the good thing is the adult contingent, or part of this research project, was not affected. For some reason, nobody was interested in collecting the incentive that we offered to adults, which was participation in a webinar with Rick and myself. I thought that was good, motivating, but it wasn't. So anyway, what we're hoping to do next year is a do-over. And as we've been discussing this in our team, we actually think the opportunity to go back and do another wave of research really only enriches our data. So we feel like we're taking lemons and we're making lemonade, and lemon meringue pie, and lemon poppy seed muffins, and lemon curd. What's great about this is we can go back and tweak a few things that we wish we would have done better or differently. It won't change our data. We've put in a lot of protection and really protected to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. But this is actually great. If you know Chris Smith's study, the National Study of Youth and Religion, they've been able to go back and compare one year to the next year in development over time. Now with confirmands, this is a little bit different because, as you know, the confirmation process in many churches will happen every year or every other year. For some, it lasts a longer period of time. But for those congregations, we can invite those congregations to participate again. And if you're a minister who participated last year, you can participate again, and there will simply be a place to check, I did this last year, I'm doing it again. But we'll be able to look at these groups. So we're hoping that, not just hoping, but we're actually really excited about what this kind of unfortunate hacking scenario lets us do. So I want to go ahead and just start talking with you about the adult respondents. So we had 3,686 adult survey respondents. This includes adults, volunteers, and parents. Of those, 1,453 identified as ministry leaders in their congregation. We used the terminology ministry leader because we wanted to include vicars and priests and ministers and pastors, whatever those denominations call themselves when they're in a leadership position. This would include maybe a Christian education director if they were somebody in charge of confirmation. And of that group, if you imagine that middle group now is 100%, of that group, 1,237 are leaders who had confirmands that year. So I'm going to share just some of the findings, these early findings that we have with you. So I'm reporting on this group. This is responses from leaders, ministry leaders who have confirmands. One of the questions that we heard before in this very early round of interviews that happened a couple years ago where we talked to ministry leaders was a frustration around teaching a heterogeneous group of youth. And they said, when I'm teaching, I've got the kids who have been there since birth, and then I've got these new kids who are coming in, and they don't know the difference between Moses and Jesus. So in our survey, we asked, how many youth did you already know before confirmation began this year? So I want you to look at this table, this graph, and I'll tell you what these categories are. So all the way to the left is the category almost all of them. 70% of ministry leaders selected that they knew almost all of them. So the other 30% fall into these categories. From left to right is more than half. 7.5% said almost half of them. 6% said less than half, and 7% said none. So what we were hearing, sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease a little bit, right? So about 30% of people are actually dealing with this mixed group. But about 70% of congregations, when somebody's in charge of teaching, they know people ahead of time. So I'd invite you, as you're looking at this, to imagine where your experience fits into this. And that will help to make some of these tables and graphs more meaningful and to compare your contexts. You might fit into that 70% group, or you might fit into one of these other groups. And this can show us a couple of things. We don't want to necessarily jump to one right interpretation. This might tell us, like our hunch was going into it, that people are teaching a heterogeneous group of youth. But it also might indicate that when confirmation happens, somebody new comes in who's foreign to the youth in the program and then is in charge of the program. That's not something we can tell from this data, but it is something that you can interpret into your local context. You know better than I do what's going on. If it's the local bishop who comes in and is teaching a group of youth and they've just never met them before. Or maybe in your town, like mine, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, that has a large Roman Catholic presence. And during, when everyone's in about 7th or 8th grade, everybody signed up for confirmation in the Roman Catholic Church, and there's a lot of social pressure to participate in something. And then the moms and dads will start talking, oh, who's got a good confirmation program? Oh, we really like the one at Fairmount Presbyterian Church. Oh yeah, you should sign your kid up. And then you get kids signed up with their friends. And that's how I would interpret this for my local context and say, for us, the mixed group, the mixing that happened was somewhat due to social pressures. Let's look at another slide here. This one takes the shape of a bell curve, and we asked ministry leaders to tell us what's the average age when confirmation is happening or begins. If you look, 12 years old is that middle column, and that's easily the most likely time when confirmation is going to happen in a youth's life is when they turn 12. 598 ministry leaders told us that's about the average age of youth starting their confirmation programs. And the next two highest are 11 and 13, and then 10 and 14. What's really interesting about this to me are we didn't expect for this table we didn't expect these numbers. We didn't expect anyone to answer 17, 18, 19, or really anyone to answer 5, 6, 7. I mean, I really didn't expect that at all. But as we've been doing our qualitative research and we've been going to some congregations and saying, what does confirmation look like here? Some congregations are saying, we're getting back to more of a catechesis model where we're thinking of the entire Christian education that happens in our church, an entire formation process as, quote, confirmation, but we're not even calling it that. So they've dropped the language of confirmation, and as we heard earlier, the language around confirmation has changed over time, and there is a lot of flexibility in the language right now that's happening in people's actual practices. So one of the churches that we'll be sharing through a portrait that's been written of this church, you'll be able to read some about what that looks like. And this also leads me to just share with you, when we've been talking about confirmation in our research, we've been using the language of and equivalent practices. So what are the confirmation and equivalent practices that churches are doing? Because some people are doing something that looks a lot like confirmation, as we would assume, but they're not calling it that. But it's a process of initiation or ownership of faith, or new members are coming in this way into churches. So this one is one that is a little bit, well, this is an interesting slide. So this is the question, what is the normal duration of the formal confirmation program? And I think that font is way too small for you to see. But the first line, the highest line, says over 4 years. How many confirmation programs are over 4 years? So 0.7% of them are over 4 years. About 2% last 3 to 4 years. About 10% last 2 to 3 years. And then you see kind of a bump, the one sticking out that's at 15%. Those are confirmation programs that last 1.5 to 2 years. Below that is 1 to 1.5 years, 9 months to 1 year. And then it gets shorter as you go down. So then they are broken up into 3-month sections. So the bottom line is less than 3 months, then 3 to 6 months, then 6 to 9 months, 9 months to 1 year. Most programs are in this lowest category. But when we break this up by denomination, it starts to really take shape and you see some trends. And the Presbyterians tend to have a much shorter confirmation program, and almost none of them go over a year. And that skews this table for other denominations also when we separate it out. I feel like this is a really good one. When I worked in youth ministry, when you start to think about what are we doing in confirmation and what are other people doing, this is a helpful one in my mind to see, okay, some people are doing 4 years, and ours is like 6 weeks long during, Lent or whatever you're choosing to do. So look for that research as it's coming out and look for your denomination's profile. And here's another one related to confirmation classes. This question is, what is the length of a typical confirmation class session? So all the way to the left, we have 30 minutes or less. That's 3.5%. 31 minutes to 60 minutes, 1%, which I would have guessed would have been a lot larger. Most classes, 47.5%, fall into the 61-minute to 90-minute category, an hour to an hour and a half. 30% are 90 minutes to 2 hours. More than 2 hours, that's 15%, and then 2.5% said no regular length. I think this is one that also takes a little bit of nuance to interpret. A lot of programs we're realizing are using retreats to get together, or a week at camp. Some are using condensed sessions with where classes and mentors and parents all have dinner together. I imagine that those 60 to 90-minute sessions aren't direct instruction, that they're doing a lot of different things in that time together. So this is an area too where we, once we're able to look at some of the other information that comes out of our data, we'll be able to make this more meaningful and say, oh, look at that. This is how they're spending that 60 to 90-minute period. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Rick, who's going to talk to us some about our qualitative research, which we're calling portraiture.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I know it's late in the afternoon, the end of a long day. Some of you guys have traveled today. So I'll try to keep this focused, and then we can begin interacting a little bit. In addition to the survey research, we're doing qualitative research, and we're using the methodology of portraiture. And what this means is that we try to go in to particular congregations and look at them in some depth. We also are going and looking at confirmation camps as well. And so since we have 5 denominations, we've tried to identify at least 4 congregations in each denomination, and we're trying to look at one camp that does confirmation camp in each denomination. And basically you try to combine good description of what's going on and get a sense of the context and so on and so forth, and then you acknowledge that you have to write it up creatively. So I see Katie's stuff. What she's been talking about is kind of, the survey research is the bird's eye view. You stand back, and then what I'm doing is portraiture, or what I'm talking about is the portraiture part of this. You guys know who this is? Einstein. And so as you look at that picture, sort of here's a portrait of him. What do you see? So just shout it out. Somebody tired? What are the lines? Does he look a little bit disheveled to you? The hair? What do you notice about the hair? Yeah. Well, what you do in portraiture is you go in and you try to actually look carefully at what's going on and gather the story and observe, do all that kind of stuff. And then you have to find out kind of the backstory. Not only what people are telling you, but things that are going on beyond the things that are really obvious. Einstein, of course, lived in Princeton, right? And here he's the brilliant academic who contributed so much to physics, and we all kind of know that story about him. But the fact of the matter is, Einstein in Princeton throughout Second World War went down to the train station every week at the same time, along with a person from Princeton Theological Seminary, Elmer Homrichhausen, who spoke German, grew up in a German Reformed church, and together they would greet the immigrants who were coming to Princeton from New York City, who were mostly Jewish. But they were coming from Germany by way of New York City. They would greet them and talk to them and help them. Now, in portraiture, you got to find out those kinds of stories. You can't go just with what presents itself on the surface, but you get the backstory, and you begin to sort of try to build up a sense of what's going on in the congregation. At the same time, you also have to be pretty self-conscious that you, as the interpreter of this story, are impacting what you see. And in portraiture, that's really clearly acknowledged, that the interpreter, the writer, the researcher has to write him or herself up. And I thought I'd illustrate this. That's a Van Gogh self-portrait, right? Is he going through a good period or a bad period there?
Good.
Good period, yeah. Good period or bad period here? What's missing there? Yeah. Okay. And good period or bad period? Yeah. Well, I mean, people don't know if he was bipolar or not, but there's a lot of speculation among mental health professionals that Van Gogh was, and how he even painted himself changed as he moved through life. And in portraiture, you kind of have to write yourself into your account so the reader knows that you're coming from this perspective as you write it up. So what we've done is, and guess who that is? You'll never guess. Flannery O'Connor. Okay? So this is an artist depicting an artist, and yet I think the artist who's being depicted is actually controlling how the artist depicts her. I think this is a little bit staged, typical Flannery O'Connor kind of activity. That's what portraiture in a way is all about. Let me give you a couple examples of the churches and then talk to you a little bit about what we're finding to this point. One example of a church we're doing a portraiture of is Korean American Presbyterian Church. It's located in a suburb of New York City. This is a projected vision of a megachurch and city in the Midwest. It has 20,000 members, 4 campuses spread out across this area, and they're moving towards trying to build a building like this that has this incredible stained glass window at the center of it. And we had a person go in and study how they're doing confirmation in this. And then we've got a portrait of an African Methodist Episcopal church. And this church happens, the pastor of that church, who's really kind of the guru of confirmation in their denomination, is going to be speaking to you later this week. And I decided I would hide the name of where it is and let him share that with you later. We got together the last day and a half, and we began to share our portraits with one another. And let me just share with you a couple things that we're finding. In portraiture and in qualitative research in general, the big thing is not the bird's eye view. Stand back and look at the big picture patterns. But it really, you zero in depth, and you try to understand this particular instance of ministry and confirmation and the context that it's part of and so on and so forth. So generally what you do when you're doing portraiture is you focus on the church and its particularity, and then you do constant comparison. We see this in this particular church, and we see this in this particular church. How are they different? And what do they have in common? And we've talked a little bit about that over the last day and a half. And here's some of the things that we've found. The first thing is the importance of congregational context. And what we mean by that is that we're finding the churches that have good confirmation program are churches that really care about youth and that children and youth, and that shows up in a lot of different ways in the congregational context. It's fairly rare, it does happen, but it's fairly rare to have a church that has a really just stunning confirmation program that's highly creative and they have nothing going on in the rest of the church. That's not usually the case. So for the most part, we're finding that faith formation that's oriented towards children and youth is very strong in the congregation as a whole, and the confirmation program is one element of this broader congregational context. We also found out, and it's sort of a part of this, that you know how they say location, location, location? I'd say context, context, context. It matters everything. We cannot, don't call me up and ask me for the right curriculum. That isn't going to do it for you. Don't ask me for the 3 or 4 steps that make a great confirmation program. That's not going to do it. But rather, what really happens is that people have adapted confirmation to their particular context in a way that works for them. For example, the Korean American church that I looked at, they only meet for 6 weeks. For Lutherans, that's got to be, right? Yes, 6 weeks. But they have, first of all, an incredibly great youth ministry program and so they build all these great relationships. For these 6 weeks, they study the Presbyterian Study Catechism, the confirmation version of that. They presuppose the Korean American emphasis upon education with strong parental investment. So they assign each of their kids a section of the study catechism to read in advance. They can assume they will have read it, they will have studied it, and they have to come to class with one question that they found really helpful and another question that they found really perplexing. Okay, now a 6-week program that assumes that level of intensity isn't going to work in every context, is it? But it works in this Korean American congregation that can assume such a strong emphasis upon education and young people who are going to really study hard for these 6 weeks, but that's surrounded by the congregational context and all kinds of other things. We're finding that the folks who are doing really creative confirmation today are thinking of confirmation as a bridge and not graduation. Now, I was familiar with the research that Rolf shared with us earlier, the search research that said you guys, the Lutherans, had the strongest rate of participation in confirmation. I bet that's still true even today, but you have the highest drop-off after confirmation. I don't have more recent research, but that's a trend worth thinking about. And folks recognize that in many congregations, confirmation is seen as a kind of graduation. And parents say, well, we got them through confirmation. Done my part, right? Okay, now they're on their own. It's up to them. The best confirmation programs are seeing faith formation as something that takes place before and something that's going to take place afterward. So this is one step on an ongoing journey of faith. And they try to develop ways to ensure that young people don't drop off but stay involved. A third thing that we found out is that just the bottom line is in every good confirmation program that we identified, there's strong leadership. And it includes things like the nuts and bolts of administration. I mean, somebody cares about that and does that and sees that the resources are there, the volunteers are recruited, the suppers are prepared, the mentors are trained, etc. All the stuff that goes into administration, which isn't glamorous, it's a lot of work, but people who are doing good confirmation programs value it so much that they're willing to give themselves and invest in that kind of administrative support. But at the same time, really the leadership factor has to do with their willingness to project a creative vision for what the confirmation program might be. And so they've already gone through, in a way, most of them, what you guys are thinking about in this conference. And that's rethinking confirmation. I won't say almost all, but a lot of the stories we've heard are, we used to do confirmation like this, and we thought about it, and we've reworked it, and now we have all these different pieces, and we have much stronger investment of young people in the program, and that is really something that a leader has made happen. So strong leadership is a factor that we're beginning to see. In addition to location, context, relationships. That probably, I don't know, the research team can rebut me or whatever, but I would have to say that in terms of what young people say about meaningful confirmation experience, the importance and power of relationships that are built up is probably the single most important thing. And the kind of experiences you guys were sharing yesterday, that would be a way of talking about it. You remember drinking beer and talking together. It's the relationship. You remember him and the kind of level of trust you built up. And what we're finding is relationships in every different direction. Relationships between the confirmands, the community built up among the peers. Relationships with mentors, okay? Good teaching, which is creative but also is relational in the way it's done, and so on and so forth. I mean, confirmation team, to lead confirmation in many programs takes a strong team. They're good relationships among the leaders, and you have a team built up. So relationships are important. And then finally, and this is one that we'd have to nuance quite a bit. I put high expectations here, but really what people are reporting to us in many different kinds of confirmation contexts is there's a negotiation of expectations that's taking place. And we do everything we can to mandate or strongly encourage or get down and beg or whatever to get them there on a regular basis and to require certain things and to tell the parents in advance that this is going to be the way it is and to negotiate with the parents that they have a sports conflict and they can't be there, then this has got to be made up. So the setting of high expectations and the negotiation of high expectations is something that's taking place in the megachurch and in the smaller churches that we're looking at in good confirmation programs. So Katie, come on up, and we're going to do Q&A, and you can monitor, or you can trust me to monitor. I'm really comfortable. And we've promised the folks that you guys would be good question askers. So don't let me down.
Can I add just two things to what you said that I observed? Or we all observed together. Yes. One was parents. So we were identifying some tensions that we saw. So some programs really involve parents, and some don't really involve them at all. There was one program where the parent had to attend everything the youth attended. And the parents in that church secretly said, not secretly maybe, but they said, I needed a refresher on all of this stuff. And I really like that I get to have it. And a lot of the volunteers are saying that too. And there's another church we visited, and the parents weren't involved at all, and they were actually said that they were kind of surprised and disappointed that they weren't involved more. And I think this has to do with those relationships and expectations.
Yeah, and expectations.
The expectations aren't just for youth, but they involve the whole family. We expect all of you to be a part of this together. There's also one other church where they have one confirmand, and the girl is doing this confirmation remotely through FaceTime. So interesting. They're living overseas for a year, but she felt she was ready and wanted to have an opportunity to go through the confirmation process. So she and her whole family's living overseas, and they're traveling to different places while they're over there. And she and her mom are planning pilgrimages together to different religious sites as they go on vacations. And they're talking together and planning it together and preparing and learning about, why is a CC important? Who's St. Francis? And they're doing it together. And then also on the line of relationships, I just can't stop talking, is it created space.
Turn off her mic.
It created space for youth to ask questions, and they talked about those relationships as places where they felt safe to talk with people rather than being talked at. I thought those were key. Key pieces of that. Anyway, I wanted to.
That's a part of it. Thank you, Katie.
Help or
we
add.
Really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So it's your turn. No more than 2 sentences in a question. No soapboxing.
No question can start with, don't you think that?
How much time?
Hi, I love everything you're talking about. I have a question, and that is, I come from a very small church, and I don't get to do confirmation every year, but I love it when I get to. Is there any way to do the survey so that you can catch some of the churches where they don't have a confirmation program going on in the year you're doing the survey? Because I think we might be missing some of the creativity that's happening in the small
Definitely.
church.
We have been very aware of that. Actually, Mark Chaves has a book called Congregations in America, and if you look where most of the people are in the big churches, but most churches are small churches. So, and we were aware that a lot of confirmation programs happen every other year with 2 or 3 kids. So we were intentional when we were looking at congregations to visit, to have some congregations that are doing confirmation with really small numbers. So as you read the portraits that are being written right now, you'll see that there are a number of churches that have very small numbers, maybe 1 person every 5 or 6 years. That's one of our churches. Another church just has 2 or 3. The way we're capturing these congregations in our survey is that even if you're a ministry leader without any confirmands, you can still take the survey. So we'll hear what people do when they do confirmation. And then we're also just making sure that we've invited them to participate. So in doing a second year of data collection will help capture some of those congregations. And the way we've decided to distribute the survey is the entire population of each denomination is invited. So every church in each denomination, the person in charge at that congregation is getting an email. So if you didn't get one, find out within your denomination who's listed as the main person or contact person at your church. They're the person who's getting this email. And theoretically, ideally, hopefully, that makes it into the hands of somebody who's in charge of confirmation or can distribute it to all those involved in confirmation.
And you can go Google the Confirmation Project, and that'll give you a link to it.
Yeah.
So you can do it yourself.
If you want to make sure you are on the list, write to us on our go to our website and go through the Contact Us page, and I'm the one who reads all of those. And what I do is when you tell me I want to get an email, I go to your church in our giant Excel document, and I make sure your name is there with your email address, and I have it sent to you. Or tell me who the person is to have the survey sent to.
Okay.
I was just wondering if one of the areas you have looked at or are going to be looking at is regions and trends by region. I have been at a congregation in Indiana. I'm now at a congregation in California, and the expectations are quite different. I was wondering if that's something you've looked at.
Yeah, well, the portraits that we're doing are spread out all over the country, and we're going to try to give ways that folks can have access to them by region, so you can try to take that into account. I think from the perspective of what we've done to this point, we've thought of that in terms of context. And thinking of we think of the confirmation program is part of a congregational context, and the congregation's in a local context, and then it's a part of a regional context. And so we do try to communicate that and its location in a particular area to a certain extent. But the thing that's so interesting is that we're finding, like Lutheran churches, for example, they're here in Minnesota. There's such diversity in the programs. It's really remarkable, and it depends so much on the particular history of the congregation and the kind of leadership they've had, and so on and so forth. So region's certainly something we want to take a look at, but I think it may be an important factor among a variety of factors that influence. Rob.
I'm curious about what has been some of the most surprising things so far that you have discovered. Looking at your common themes, to me those are not terribly surprising. They seem pretty expected. What are some things, and I know it's still new data, but what's sort of something new? And then sort of second, maybe with that is, if we're in such a changing context, kind of, how do I say, and we're sort of looking backwards, it feels like. So what are new emerging trends that you're seeing that are apart from these common themes that don't seem too aha yet?
You want to take that?
I think for the really exciting, innovative, kind of pushing the edge type of congregations, there are some really interesting collaborations that are happening. So some of the portraits that we've written aren't really actually about one congregation. They're about a group of congregations that are coming together and working to figure out how do we make this a meaningful event or program or rite of passage for youth when we are kind of frustrated with the status quo. And so there's two women who started meeting together. They used to be camp directors. They are bringing their youth together to get to know other Christians in community in Lake Tahoe. I don't mind going there. And then doing confirmation outside of that context. But as they've grown and kind of realized this has been successful, they're bringing more people along with them. And so they've invited other additional youth to be involved in that program. Some of
Lisa Kimball, a person of the research team, why don't you stand up and contribute to this, and then anybody else wants to. It's a great question, really.
Can we run a
Excellent
mic?
question.
I'll run a mic over. Yes. Oh yeah, good call. Camps. Jacob Sorensen, who's one of your own here at Luther, is
Luther person.
doing this amazing research with camps that is awesome because no research has really been done on camps. So the amount of Christian formation that's happening there and intentional education, it's not all fun and games. They're just creating, when they talk about the space and relationships, camp has this very special effect on youth, making them feel like I'm welcome here. This is my space. I can zip line through a sanctuary maybe here, and maybe not directly in the lessons, but outside of that, they're able to ask some really creative questions. So some people are sending kids to camp, which is really interesting if we think of confirmation as something that integrates you into the life of the church, which questions then, what's the church that we're integrating them into? Is it something bigger than four walls? Or is it something, or are we just doing something that we're really saying, okay, now you're on the list and you're gonna get called to be on a committee? So, I mean, some of the most innovative things I think come out of that. And that church I was telling you about with the one confirmand, I think some of the most creative stuff is when resources are limited. And in our portraits, you'll see some of that. There's one portrait written about a church in California where it's a group of immigrants who are not documented. And what does it mean for them to become members in a country where they're not allowed membership? So there are some really innovative things going on that we can learn from kind of their stories. And as far as the data set goes, I'm waiting to be surprised. I'm digging through all these things, and I actually said to somebody, this is gonna be kind of boring because I'm not telling you anything new. This is just kind of like when we say emerging, I mean literally, like I got a SPSS file and we're going through it and just trying to dig around and say, what's actually interesting and different and new? Because some of this isn't really it's not that exciting.
What does that tell you?
We'll have to think about that together. What does that tell us?
And I'll share two things real quickly that have surprised me, or that I've been surprised about. You know, for so long I have struggled with and heard about people saying our young people are so busy today and their lives are overprogrammed, they're just spread all over the place. And we found some churches that actually are adapting to that and figured out how to take into account the busyness of young people and their family structure as well, dual career couples, and still have incredibly meaningful confirmation experiences. That was surprising to me because I had kind of imagined it as, well, you really just have to set up what your expectations are and kind of be demanding. If you have high commitment, then you're going to better outcome. Well, we found some churches that have figured out how to negotiate that in highly creative ways and have the young people say, this is so meaningful to me. It's really, and I'll stop there just so we can let others.
One of the things you said was that the congregations that were having effective confirmation programs or ministries had engaged the question already of rethinking confirmation. They had kind of already reached that point. Was your research able to kind of get at what brought them to ask the question in the first place? Or just was it sheer desperation?
Sometimes.
It was kind of a combination of all those. I mean, sometimes it wasn't the same thing everywhere. Sometimes it was new leadership that kind of came in and said, we've been doing it like this way for a long time. It just seems to be stale and out of date. Or sometimes we found parents who were saying that. Sometimes we found parents who resisted changing it. And it was really coming from the young people themselves. So we can't say it's any one thing. But the fact of the matter is there was a serious willingness to, how Luther talks about how you have to return to your baptism every day and die and rise. Christ, there's a sense in which you have to take these programs back and let them die and rise. Again, for a freshness to be there. And I think we saw that in lots of different ways in the churches we were looking at. That was a great question. Thank you for that.
I really like data like this. I think it's really interesting. So when I get information like this, or from the excellent classes I took here at Luther, and I bring them back to my congregation, and I say, folks, we got to look at this and do something with it. Sometimes I get the response of, well, but that's not our congregation. And I know that context is very important. However, sometimes there's this almost self-imposed congregational exceptionalism that we're not part of those kind of trends. We don't need to look at that.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how we can take this sort of information to our people and say, folks, we really got to take this into consideration for what we're going to do to move forward?
Katie, you want to take
I think that what we're really hoping to do as we start to share our portraits, and they'll be sent to you by email if you're on our contact list, and they'll come out kind of one at a time, is we're hoping that in reading these, you're going to identify with some and resonate with some of them. And you'll say, oh, we're a small church. That's a small church. They only have one confirmand. We only have 2 confirmands. And you'll start to be inspired, or that will become a conversation partner. And you can even say, read this story and tell me what you think when you see it. Do you feel dissatisfied the way I feel dissatisfied? Do we feel like we have resources we're not using? What are those resources? And then there's also churches like this big mega church. I hadn't seen that picture yet of the plans for the building. But I mean, a lot of you aren't at those large churches, but some of you are. And we're hoping that in the interaction between kind of looking at somebody else's story and then reflecting on your own, you'll be able to come up creatively with some of those changes. And sometimes as a minister, you're supposed to bring the comfort, and sometimes you're supposed to bring the crisis. So and actually in my workshop, I'm going to tell you how to make some numbers sound good or sound bad. I mean, some of these trends, we can't make statistics say anything, but there are ways you can highlight things and bring a sense of urgency to say, hey, we're in that 70% category. We do know all of our kids. Maybe this should be a moment for mission and reaching out to our communities. We don't want to be in that 70% where we know all the kids who are in confirmation. We should be reaching out. You can tell it a little differently. So hopefully we can help equip you to do that.
Rolf is already looking at his watch. I'll try to keep this focused.
2 sentences. We'll give you 2.
We have talked a lot about what confirmation looks like, what it feels like, size, and all of the rest. Are you looking at the content as it shows up in different churches? Some churches talk about atonement different, and so on. How does that play into this?
Yeah, to me, that's been one of the most interesting things, and that's where denominational diversity really shows up. I mean, we're kind of skirting around this, we're talking about it a little bit, but you know, the AME and the United Methodists have a little bit of a different soteriology than the Reformed and the Lutheran, and particularly when it comes to thinking about what goes on in confirmation and the importance of the decision. And in the earlier lecture we saw, you know, you have these 9 different understandings and they overlap, and my guess is there are a lot of differences and variation here within the room. A lot of the purpose of confirmation is driving the content in a lot of ways, and sometimes that purpose is more implicit than it should be. And so I think part of what we're going to do is encourage folks to take a look at, well, what are you really trying to accomplish in confirmation, and what is the subject matter of that in certain ways, okay? So I can't say that we've got that figured out yet, but we are trying to look at it as we go along, and we've at least gotten to that point. How are we doing on time?
I'm going to call it end of questions. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.